Hi everyone! In this tutorial, I'll show you how I created this storybook style illustration in Clip Studio Paint. I'll take you through my entire process, from the first thumbnail sketches and composition ideas all the way to the final rendering. Along the way, I'll explain how I use the lasso tool, values, lighting, and composition to create a scene that feels atmospheric and tells a story. Let's get started.
First, I started by making thumbnail sketches. Thumbnails are small, quick sketches that help establish the scene. They let you test whether the composition tells the story clearly and whether everything is placed in a visually pleasing way. I decided on the theme of a fox guiding a child through a forest. I already had a scene in mind, but I still wanted to explore different versions before choosing the final composition. While creating them, I thought about the focal points, where the viewer's eyes would naturally be drawn, and how the lines in the composition could guide that movement. I also experimented with different camera angles and different ways of presenting both the story and the atmosphere of the environment. I even considered combining two scenes into a single illustration, dividing the image into two parts to make it feel like the characters were on a journey. In other sketches, I used the surrounding foliage to frame the scene, creating a more intimate and emotional moment, like the one where the lost child is frightened and the fox appears to guide them. In this part, I went through all of the thumbnails and analyzed why I liked or disliked each one. For the first one, I felt that the composition was too flat. It was a very simple idea, and I thought I had stronger options to explore. The second one had really good framing. I liked the focal points and the way the composition guided the viewer's attention. The third one was also interesting because it had more storytelling. It was divided into two smaller sections, which made it feel like we were seeing different moments of the journey. Another thumbnail had strong framing as well. The focal points were clear, and the guiding line worked especially well because the fox is leading the child. This one also had a nice composition with large focal points that stood out on the page. However, I thought the camera angle would be difficult to execute. I also felt that it didn't capture the emotion I wanted, which was a darker and more gloomy atmosphere. For this one, I liked the idea of viewing the scene from behind a branch because it created an eerie feeling. However, I felt that the characters were too small and that it didn't work as well as a final illustration. This thumbnail had strong framing as well. I liked that we are positioned beside the child and looking toward the fox, almost as if we are experiencing the journey with the child and trusting the fox to guide us. As you can see, I used an X to mark the focal points and analyze where the viewer's attention would go. The last one also had good framing, clear focal points, and a nice division of planes within the composition. In the end, I spent some time comparing the strongest options. I even made a few additional sketches on the side to explore more ideas. After considering all of them, I decided to go with the second thumbnail that I circled. Now, I quickly sketched out a more refined version of the chosen thumbnail. This part was probably one of the hardest stages because when working with thumbnails, it's easy to place a few simple lines and make the composition feel right. However, once you start developing the idea further, you have to think about what each line actually represents, and it becomes much more complicated and messy. As you can see, I spent a lot of time trying to preserve the same feeling and atmosphere from the thumbnail. I even experimented with changing the perspective, but I didn't feel like it worked as well, so I went back to the original idea. At this stage, I was still exploring how the final scene would actually look and making sure the mood was right. After that, I started dividing the image into different planes. The elements closest to the viewer, such as these grass shapes framing the image, were made the darkest. As the elements move further into the background, they become brighter. I fixed the values later to use only the darker half of the grayscale range because I knew I wanted the overall scene to feel dark. The fox carries a lantern, which will be the brightest and most important light source in the image. By keeping the environment darker and creating strong contrast with the lantern, I can naturally guide the viewer's eye toward the focal point. Here, you can see me adjusting the values and checking that each element is separated into clear planes, which will make the later stages easier. I added some extra details to better understand how the scene would work and to make sure the idea in my head translated into the image. After that, I continued refining the values and making sure that the main focal points, the characters, were among the brightest elements in the scene because they are the most important part of the story. Then, I used a gradient map to quickly establish the colors, mood, and overall atmosphere of the scene. I downloaded this gradient map from the Clip Studio Paint asset store, and I have it linked below in the tutorial webpage. I knew I wanted the illustration to have a darker atmosphere, with colors leaning toward blues and purples, but I wasn't completely sure what direction I wanted to take it in. I experimented with different options and compared how each one affected the feeling of the scene. In the end, I chose this blue and slightly purple color palette. Now that I had the base colors established, I could move on to rendering the background in more detail. For the foliage, I used a technique where I first create shapes with the lasso tool and then use a soft brush with different color values to add variation and details. I repeated this method throughout the entire illustration. I also made sure to work from the back of the image toward the front. This way, the different layers of foliage naturally overlap each other, which helps create more depth and makes the environment feel more realistic. For the trees, I first added some variation to the color of the trunks. I used a slightly lighter blue to highlight certain areas and create more depth. Then, I used different values of blue to add grooves and wooden patterns onto the bark, giving the trees more texture and detail. I only applied this level of detail to the 3 larger trees because they were the most important ones in the composition. When creating an illustration, you have to carefully choose where you spend your time and add detail. Even though I was developing the environment, I still wanted to make sure that the focus remained on the characters. I added some more details to the grass around the trees. I continued using the same technique with the lasso tool and a soft brush to create different shapes and add variation to the environment. I added a transition between the lake and the hill by introducing more foliage and extra details in the water. I also made the hill slightly more spiky to give it more character and make it feel like it is covered with grass and natural vegetation. Then I started rendering the fox. I used the same method with the lasso tool, creating separate shapes and making sure each one had a clean and appealing silhouette. I placed these shapes on separate layers, which made it easier to shade and adjust them later. I added the details of the fox, such as the lighter fur areas, the white fluff on the tail, and the darker tips of the ears. After that, I added the facial details including the eyes and nose. I rendered the lantern that the fox is holding in its mouth using the same technique with the lasso tool, carefully following the shape of the object to keep the form clear and readable. For the light around the lantern, I used the same technique as I did for the foliage and grass. I first used the lasso tool to create a shape and filled it with a bright yellow color. Then, using a soft eraser, I feathered out the edges to create a smoother transition. After that, I changed the layer blending mode to Add Glow, which created a bright, glowing, white-yellow light effect around the lantern. Then I used one of the textures from the Materials tab. You can simply click and drag it into the scene to apply it. Since the texture made the overall image a bit darker, I used correction layers to bring back the brightness and adjust the appearance of the scene. Unfortunately, the screen recording did not capture this part, but I was mainly adjusting the hue, luminosity, and contrast to get the right look. After that, I erased the effect from the areas where I didn't want the texture or adjustments to be applied, keeping the changes focused only on the parts that needed them. In the end, I added small wisps of light around the scene to guide the viewer's eye and also guide the child, bringing the storytelling element back into the illustration. I created each shape using the lasso tool and then added the glow effect using the same technique I used for the lantern and the glowing grass. This helped connect the lighting elements together and strengthen the atmosphere of the scene.
And that is the end. I hope you enjoyed the illustration. And I hope this tutorial helped you see how useful the lasso tool can be when creating a storybook-like feeling in your artwork. To summarize, I recommend starting with simple shapes and using the lasso tool to create clean, readable forms. Then, use subtle shading and value changes to add depth and dimension to your illustrations. If you want to create a strong storybook atmosphere, remember to think about the viewer's eyes and how you guide them through the image. Every shape, line, and lighting choice can help tell the story. Thank you for watching.